Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host with a toast, Andrew Plaw at Andrew Plaw Tech, and I want to toast everybody out there. Everyone who's growing out there with us with the PowerShell Podcast. If you're an experienced PowerSheller who just can't get enough, or if you're someone who's early on in their journey learning things for the first time, biting off more than you can chew sometimes, and you kind of enjoy the community aspect of things and the support that you can get from that, well, thank you. Thank you for an amazing year. This is our holiday episode. I have a very special guest today, friend of the podcast, Gilbert Sanchez, PowerShell lover, staff development engineer at Tesla. He's been on here before, but welcome back, Gilbert. And you have some gifts for the people here today, and we'll give them out as we go. But welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's fun to be here for the holiday special. I wear my holiday hat.
Oh, should we talk about how we look like kind of ridiculous? I mean, festive. Sure. We look festive. Yeah. If you're on YouTube, you can see how festive we look in the amazing attire that we are sporting on this fine occasion. But Gilbert, I heard something from you recently, and it perturbed me. It disturbed me. And that was that you don't watch the YouTube versions of the podcast.
I don't.
So I forgive you. It's okay. Get in where you fit in. If you're a listener, you're a listener. That's great. But I will say, good sir, that I have a gift for you and for everyone else out there listening who has not watched this video yet. So I did a little clip for PDQ, a 5-minute video on some of my favorite moments on the podcast. And you know what was in there that you haven't seen yet? That hurts my heart, Gilbert. You haven't seen Jeffrey Snover flip the double bird at the camera on the PowerShell Podcast. So I hooked you up with the link in the show notes. Yep, link in the show notes. Check out that video. There's a lot of cool moments. We got Phil Bossman. We got some security talk. Obviously, we got the PowerShell inventor, Jeffrey Snover, but many gifts we're giving away today. But I'm pretty sure the rest of them are coming from you. So no pressure from me. We have our good elf here. Actually, you're a reindeer, actually. I'm the elf.
Yes, I'm the reindeer. The elf in this house was my wonderful wife who when I told her I needed a holiday hat, ran out and picked one up for me. So thank you, Nicole. I love you very much.
Oh my gosh, Nicole, you're the best. Gosh.
She's going to hate that I called her Nikki. 1K.
1K. Well, dude, that's awesome. And I apologize for giving you 0-day notice that I wanted to have us wear silly things.
It's, we make it work.
That's the thing about PowerShell. It's like we're professionals, right? But we also have a little bit of fun. PowerShell's fun. We're trying to balance a little bit while we're here today on this PowerShell holiday episode. But let's get started, man. We want to talk about some stuff today, and that's including the AST, or the abstract syntax tree, which is some advanced stuff, but I kind of want to build into it. You're actually going to give us a little demo. I may have gotten a little teaser, and it was very enlightening. I'm actually pretty stoked. Before we've been talking for an hour before we went live. We pair programmed. Can you confirm?
You can certainly call it that. There was 2 of us.
There was 2 of us, and one of us did the heavy lifting. I'm not going to say who it was. You can guess. Maybe the person who's doing a demo, but maybe the person who's just sitting here talking, saying nonsense to the camera. One of us. But I want to talk about PSScriptAnalyzer a little bit, because I saw your blog. I saw you've been writing about it. I know that you're an advanced PowerShell user. And when I say this, don't let Gilbert fool you. He sounds normal, right? You can listen to him. You're like, oh, I can relate to that guy.
I'm
He's a normal
definitely
guy.
Abnormal.
He is when it comes to PowerShell. He is good with it. I tell you what, I'm watching him plug away. And I think you've had some opportunities for some advanced use cases. And I think you're sort of going to give us some enlightenment on where you are with things with that. But let's just get started. What is PSScriptAnalyzer? What is that?
So that is the native PowerShell command or module that allows you to lint your code. It can catch when you have bad syntax. It can help you improve some of your code. So if you use certain commands that you maybe shouldn't, it'll kind of capture that. And PSScriptAnalyzer, for the most part, has been pretty stable. It's gotten some recent updates, but it's very much the rules that are out there are sort of generic rules. And so I have seen folks write custom PSScriptAnalyzer rules for themselves. So the one I came across was by Jordan, Jordan Boryans. And what I didn't see was a good way for you to be able to share that, especially if you're talking about across all your code repositories, or potentially like across your organization. Like once you write a rule, how do you get that everywhere? So that's what that blog covers. I came up with this kind of term that I call the proxy module, that basically allows you to share your script analyzer rules as a module, and then it basically hands off the actual rules.
Okay.
Using the proxy. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me break this down a little bit. So people who out there who've used VS Code, they may have seen some PSScriptAnalyzer and not even really known it. Is that fair to say?
Totally.
Yeah, because there's some integration there where like any code you write, let's say you initialize a variable and never call it again, like you get some red text. That is PSScriptAnalyzer, right?
Correct. Yeah, so if you get red text or yellow text, that's basically PSScriptAnalyzer under the hood.
And so by
but
default,
you can also, another thing I want to call is you can also call Script Analyzer directly. And so for a lot of folks, that's kind of the only way they would do it. And now with it integrated in VS Code, it's automatic, right? And so this is kind of the power of it. It's like you already have the thing there. How can you leverage it for everybody?
Yeah, because I think what we see in VS Code is just the helpfulness of making it available to us and present without us having to know it actually exists. But you can kind of leverage that knowledge and end up using it with some cool projects, right? You can go from just an individual trying to write somewhat clean code that works. PSScriptAnalyzer is good for that. Helps you avoid some kind of common pitfalls. But also as maybe like a project maintainer or someone who's more advanced in their PowerShell journey, you can use it for some more customized things where you can kind of create your own rules. And that's sort of the space you're in a little bit, is where you were able to kind of create some of your own rules and sort of distribute it in your org kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. You can imagine, there's some consensus around certain rules, right? But there's definitely going to always be, a personal preference or a maybe an org-wide kind of maybe mandate or something that says like, here's how we should write this code. And by this is a good way to make it so that happens automatically. ScriptAnalyzer has the ability to auto-fix certain things. So if you can plug into it correctly, you can actually have it fix stuff for you. So it's handy.
Nice. Yeah, it's a pretty cool blog. I'll have a link to it in the show notes if you want to dive a little bit deeper. But that's what I really enjoy about PowerShell. This sort of PSScriptAnalyzer thing represents the kind of principle. You can start easy and get a ton of value, and you can take it to the advanced side of things where you can be doing this in a very enterprise environment. Some of the top orgs in the whole world are maybe using some of these approaches, which is really cool to sort of wrap your head around, because PowerShell and VS Code is a tool that will sort of scale with you in your career. Whether you're at a small mom and pop shop kind of cutting your teeth, enjoying things, or you're at maybe a place with a little bit more established procedure. So,
yeah. One thing I'd add also is PowerShell is awesome with the fact that the AST is available to you like extremely trivially. Like you get it almost out of the box. Where I first learned about ASTs and writing what are called S expressions to the kind of search. It's almost like you can imagine like grep for ASTs was in Ruby and writing Chef code. So it was like, okay, here's this thing that has to parse the code, and you get something, you get an AST, but it looks very different than the PowerShell. But once you kind of conceptualize what that means, you can kind of carry that into other languages. And PowerShell just does that, makes that very easy to do. Like you can actually inspect it very trivially.
I was seeing that. I'm looking forward to jumping into the demo here pretty soon, but I want to give people a little bit more background. So this AST, this abstract syntax tree, from what I saw, and you can kind of clarify where I'm wrong here, it is basically like whenever you have something in PowerShell, it needs to be, I guess, processed by the engine, and it turns into something, and it turns into like all this stuff, right? So the AST is sort of your way at seeing the different things that your command actually is, that PowerShell uses in another step later down the road. But in the meantime, you can still see access to like a full object it turns your code into like a blown out object with tons of properties. Is that fair? Where am I wrong here? Where can you fill me in?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to describe it. Is you can imagine that if you look at your PS1 file, it is just text. It's a text document, right? There's the words inherently don't make they don't make the code, right? Something has to read those words, determine that, that verb noun is actually a function, and it has to say, this is what a string looks like, and this is what a flag looks like, right? And so really you're talking about kind of like the core fundamentals of like how you create a language. And so the AST is like the text was read, and then PowerShell is like, here's that as an object. Like now you can go and take a look at this tree and see what is it? How was it interpreted, right?
Which is more on the high level end of things. Like you have to be pretty experienced in PowerShell to be at the point where you're ready to utilize that. I feel maybe not super advanced, but at least intermediate. Right out of the gate, you don't need to worry about that. Things happen in the background. PowerShell takes care of it for you. But at any point in time, if you need to leverage some of this additional information, it's already there for you. You just need to know about a certain variable and some properties. And I think we're going to go through some of that here pretty shortly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's just so cool. I love how, like with this object-oriented language, just by running stuff, we get so much added value, because to maybe parse things and kind of come up with that on our own would take a very significant amount of coding that I don't really want to do just to solve a little problem.
Yeah, and with other languages, it's like a secondary thing, right? It's like we made the language, we make it run, and then somebody else comes by and it's like, all right, I got to write something to parse that and make the tree. Whereas like with PowerShell, you just get it again out of the box, right? It's like once I realized that like .ast existed, it was like, with get member, I was able to start, poking around, and it's like, what is that thing? And I've never seen that type. What does that mean? And so you start to kind of, start to look under the hood. It's like, it is a little bit of like, we're going to, watch the sausage get made. It's a little terrifying, but I think once you realize that it's maybe not as scary as it looks, it can be extremely powerful.
And I think it's very insightful too. Like it's a good opportunity if you're on the more beginner side of things and you haven't really explored objects with like a bunch of different members and members with inside members and things like that. Like this is a great opportunity to do that with some code that you're writing, and it'll sort of make logical sense to you. And you can do it within a vacuum. You don't need a full environment. You just need a couple lines of code. But Gilbert, let's get into it, man, because I don't want to talk about it. I want to be about it. Can you show me how to be about it?
Sure.
All right, let's check this out.
I will do my best. So I definitely want to preface with this is a very hastily made demo. .ps1 is an accurate name for this, and I'll do my best to describe for folks who are listening. Just because this is again a text-heavy demo. But what I have on my screen is a parameter called script block. That is a script block. So yeah, sorry, a variable called script block. That is a script block. So that would be the curly braces wrapping your code. So that is code that is not executed until you tell it to execute, right? And in that, I have a couple of commands, a couple of write hosts, and a couple of commands called get fighter, which is just a dummy command I threw in there. Some of them have a flag that say -chill. So, and then all of them have a dash name. So there's, Jill and Gilbert and Andrew, right? We have these three fighters. And so if I go ahead and run that, we have this script block variable. And if we do script block.ast, that'll let us inspect the actual AST. And the ASTs have a bunch of different properties, including the begin, process, and end blocks. If this was a parameter and I had a parameter block, you would see that there as well. And so you can imagine you could use things like, maybe I want to go look at maybe I want to do something with parameters, right? Maybe I have a particular preference on how the parameters should look, right? Maybe they should all rhyme. I don't know, something crazy. Use ChatGPT to do something like that. And then, yeah, the object is something you can walk. It's something that you can also run different commands. The main thing you probably want to look at are the blocks. So I'm going to run this method on it, or I'm going to call a property on it called endBlock.
Okay. So I'm kind of wrapping my head around what I'm saying here. So super simply, you just access the AST property of the script block parameter. I mean, a variable, right? And you have access to everything we're looking at here, which is super powerful. And literally all you need to do is just put .ast and you have access to it, which is huge. Yep. Also, I think I was talking earlier about how this is a good way to actually learn how PowerShell sort of works under the hood, in addition to being a good way to observe objects. By the way, we look a little bit ridiculous in these hats, but that's cool. But I'm also kind of learning something about PowerShell. I probably learned it before, but I've forgotten it. But when you look at the end block, it looks like that's all the code that we've ran. So I guess by default, if you don't specify begin process end, I'm guessing that an end block is what's ran.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Learning on the spot here, man. Yep. Looking at an AST. Am I an advanced PowerSheller yet? Let's go.
I think so. I think you are.
Okay, but you're looking at the end block property.
Yeah, so because we didn't have a begin process block and nor a parameter block, it just everything kind of ends up in the end block. So we took a look at that. And so these objects are made up of statements. They're made of they'll tell you kind of different things about themselves. So if one thing I didn't put in the demo, but I'll go and just run it here, is I will get the type. You'll notice that this is called named block AST. And so you can, I'll cover this a little bit later, but you can find, AST has an ability to find by type. So you can pretty easily write a short piece of code that says, like, give me all the name blocks. Now, this demo we're only looking at one little script block, but you could do this across a bunch of files. And maybe you want to say, like, hey, I want to find if any of the files have duplicate function names, right? I want to see which file has which function name. This, you could say, give me all the name blocks, go in those, find anything with a function name that looks, and then tell me what that block was, right? But you can imagine you have all sorts of things. But let's take a look at those statements real quick. So what I'm running is, I'm calling the variable script block .ast.endblock.statements. So I'm looking at the end block, all the statements in the end block. And in there, we see this thing called pipeline elements. And basically that looks like every single line, right? So like now we can start poking around. Let me look at the first one in there. And the first one I have is write host hello. And so I'm going to skip these couple, but what I want to do is I want to jump over to like maybe something that's a little bit more interesting, is like, what if I just want to find like just the commands, like I want to find every command. The script block is only commands right now, but you can imagine a bigger one where there's a bunch of comments and maybe some variables. Like this method on the AST is called find all.
Yeah.
And what it takes is essentially another script block and optionally a second property for recursing. And so what I'm saying is, hey, give me for everything in here, I'm going to look for something that is a command.ast. So I mentioned that the name block AST, this is a different AST type. So this is actually going to go in and find all of the commands. And so I'm going to run this. And so it's a little hard to kind of see here, but essentially what I got back was all of the commands. So the write host, the 3 get fighters, and then the final write host. But like, let's say for example, I need to go and grab like all the fighters. And I want to save this. I'm going to say grab all the fighters from the script block. I'm going to look for anything that is a command AST, and I'm going to say run this method on it that says .get command name, and I want to see if that's equal to get fighter. And what that'll do is it'll filter out only functions that are called get fighter.
This is getting to be some advanced PowerShell, I'll be honest.
Yeah, now it's this is definitely, I think, on the advanced end, but if you look at what this is essentially just a simple function that says, I'm going to take in an AST, I'm going to look for this type. There's a special method on it that says get command name, and then I just want to say, hey, is there one that says get fighter?
Did you define $AST at some point?
It comes in at the very beginning right here where it says param. So,
but it's like an automatically existing kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And this could be anything, right? ASDF, foo. Let's see.
And the false at the end, what's that for?
And that's for whether you want it to go recursive or not. So that actually could matter. So if you, let's say you have in your script, you have multiple script blocks, and you don't necessarily want to keep digging deeper into those. Maybe you only want to look at that level. That's helpful. I think,
and that's a comma, so it's like an overload on the .find all or whatever the thing was called. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm saying, hey, give me all the commands, get the ones that are called get fighter, right? And then we had that, ridiculous flag called dash chill, and I'm gonna loop over all of those get fighter commands and look for anything that has that like dash chill. I don't know what a chill fighter. I don't know what a chill fighter is, but that's what me and Andrew came up. That's what me and Andrew came up with beforehand. So, but you can see there's, we get 1, 2 responses, right? There's 2 fighters that have this dash chill.
Okay.
You could imagine a scenario where you can say, hey, you know what? We call this command and it has dash name Gilbert, but you know what? Gilbert's not a chill fighter, or this sounds so ridiculous. But you want to look for I need to go and find those examples where those things actually don't make sense, right? And while this is a silly example, you could imagine that you need to go find things where the function won't stop it from being called that way, but maybe you don't want it to be called that way. Like maybe there's a flag, you can pass 2 flags, but in the code, you probably don't want it to do both, right? You actually want to say, hey, you should use one or the other. You could write some code where you can say, hey, I'm going to go look for anything where, where it's chill and the name is Gilbert, and I want to flag that to say hey, you need to go fix this. These 2 things, they don't go together. An example I gave was where you need uniqueness across all of them, right? Like you can't have it called twice. So if you have a giant piece of code and each call has to be unique on some parameter, maybe there's an ID. You want to be able to say username, right? You want to say, hey, you know what? I want to look at all of the commands. I want to look at that ID field, and I want to make sure that they're unique. And if it's not unique, I want to highlight this, right? Here if you're looking at the video, you can see that one of the variables I put in here is highlighted because it's not used. But again, that's kind of what you could have it do, right? Is you could have it highlight that piece of code saying, hey, by the way, this command call you made, you're using it in a way that we don't want, and you should go fix it. And so there's a ton of really good articles out there that talk about how to write AST searches, and but once you kind of get to this point and you're like, wait, I can look this is a great way to look at code programmatically, which kind of sounds weird to say, but one thing, when I've talked to folks about this in the past, are like, well, why would I bother doing this? I can just run regex and find all of the cases where, get fighter and dash chill exist on the same line. But where that doesn't work is when you do things like splatting. So if you splat, you can walk the tree in such a way to figure out hey, this got a splatted parameter. I need to go back and actually see what those values are. And then I can still get that ID even though it was splatted. And now I can still get an accurate assessment of like, did this get used multiple times? Versus a regex, which would never capture it, right?
Because it's looking at the actual code that's being ran. Like it's actually running the kind of engine thing on it and turning it from just words into actual code that's kind of ready to be executed, parsed, all that kind of thing.
Right. I don't show it in the demo because honestly, I think it would be way too, especially for a podcast, would probably be way too much. But you could imagine what that kind of unlocks, right? Like once you have access to say, like, I can see every command, I can see every parameter past that command. I could see that it received a splatted command and then go walk back up and say, okay, I'm going to go to the parent, right? We see that in some of these is they have a parent. So I can go back up to the parent AST and say, where is that splat set? And let me go look at those values. And so you could, in theory, kind of get to the point where you can figure out what the final command that's going to be executed is going to look like. You can't get 100% perfect because there's always going to be stuff like if it's from a parameter, you're not going to know what it's going to be. But you could imagine that if it's set in line in the code, you could figure it out.
Awesome. So at a very high level, you got code rewriting. There's PSScriptAnalyzer. If you want to get actually hands on your code, like you mentioned, programmatically look at your code, whatever, really dive in, you're going to have to use the AST, which is cool. If you aren't ready for that, if that's not a current thing, know that it exists and know that that's there for you if you run into that requirement in the future. And if you do, maybe we can get the code that you've been running, Gilbert, and we can put it into a gist because there's some great ways to get started. Because I'll be honest, the syntax on this, you're going to have to research something unless you know exactly how dot find all works. You might need to know what the overloads are. This is a great starting point to do some of the things we have here. But I mean, dude, this is a fancy stuff.
I think I'm going to try to put together a little bit of maybe a blog on that. I think Jeff Hicks has a good blog, if I remember correctly. This is definitely, this is not, I stand on the shoulder of giants, right? Like, this is not stuff that I just,
AST,
I didn't invent this, right? I happen to know some of these things through learning other, again, once I learned what an AST was in other languages and I came to this language, it became like a thing that's like, oh, this is here and it's for free and it's, I can do that. Like when you start to leverage that stuff, it's very helpful. And like you're saying, you may not need to write this stuff, but you may get to the point where you're like, oh, dang, I have this really weird thing I have to find and replace. And Control F ain't going to do it. Like it's too hard. You can start to look at this stuff and like, reach out and ask for help and stuff.
Yeah. If you're a curious person like I am, I mean, this stuff is very enlightening, especially if you don't have a traditional CS background. And if you do, you're probably more interested because you maybe know of different ways you can utilize it. But it really gives you some insight into what's happening under the covers. For me, as someone who's like PowerShell's their first kind of dealio, it's very enlightening for me. So appreciate you sharing that. And, you mentioned you stand on the shoulder of giants. I think we often tell people that it's so helpful to just share your perspective. And you're a great example of that. No, you didn't create the AST, but you had a use case. You used it. It's interesting to you. You're sharing with others. And guess what? New people have learned about it, man. Hey, you're helping people out here.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like to help people. So this is, it's part of why I wrote it, right? Like, again, I saw that article of like sharing these things was one of those things of like, hey, nobody's done this. Like, does anybody know if this is the thing that could be done? And like, how does that work how does PSScriptAnalyzer work under the hood? Like, what does it actually need? And then just being kind of like endlessly curious and kind of poking and poking. Sometimes you definitely run into some weird stuff because you're trying to understand it all. But like, it can be quite a journey, but I think it helps you understand the language and the tools a little bit better. And then I think it helps you build confidence in knowing that you're probably doing things either the right way or at least a slightly more efficient way. Spend 10 hours understanding how it works so that you can be 1 more hour efficient, right? Like, but I will say ASTs specifically have helped me a lot. I've saved a lot of hours. I have been able to bubble up a lot of issues. even to myself, like, oh yeah, this is obviously the thing. And then, again, having a nice red line that says, hey, actually you did this already above, that's a problem, like don't do that, is very helpful, right? Like I want the editor to guide me in the right direction.
And I think then anytime we have a problem, we want to solve it once and for all. So if you identify a requirement in your code, and this is maybe code that's going to exist 15 years from now or whatever, it's your job to write things at an enterprise level. Well, now you have a mechanism for accomplishing that. But I think it's a sign of a mature IT team when you're ready for that, or a mature project, or whatever the thing's going on. You're in a good spot if you're looking at things like this. Would you agree?
You can certainly be in a bad spot and look at these things. So this is like, if you join an org that has a lot of tech debt, this is like a great way to tackle that. Of like, how do I find, hey, we don't want to use this command anymore. Where is it getting used? Like, this is a great way to be kind of, have very precise changes, or like know exactly where things are. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in a situation where you're like, I think we controlled F and replaced all the right places, and then find out, oops, no, we didn't, like we missed something and something broke and we don't understand how, right? So, but it's, this is something you probably would want at scale. Maybe that's how I'd phrase it. It's like, this matters at scale.
And again, kind of high level. So we have PSScriptAnalyzer that has rules. To create those rules, you can look at the AST, which kind of breaks down what's being ran. And that can sort of be the object you look at to create, like, if this exists, don't do this. If this command is repeated, don't do that. And your blog talked about a way to share those PSScriptAnalyzers with other projects, right? Just kind of full circle. So
correct.
We'll have a link to all of that in the show notes. Maybe we'll include an extra link. Who knows? But yeah, that's pretty awesome stuff, man. That was, I've heard about AST a handful of times, and I generally got it. For some reason, I don't know, just seeing you just call .ast, maybe I've learned about it enough times that it clicked now.
Honestly, I think that's just run that, right? Take a piece of code, turn it into a script block, .ast, and then just kind of poke around, right? Like, again, the power of PowerShell is like being able to, use that reflection to look at what's going on. And it's, it's not magic. It's just a lot of crazy engineering.
Yep. But you can definitely turn it from magic into something that makes a lot of sense. And I think you kind of alluded to it earlier, but ASTs are part of a bunch of languages. It's kind of like a core thing that needs to happen if you're going to turn text into executed code, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, starting this journey, I didn't think I'd have to know that stuff, but year over year, this is a tool that's going to help us with our career. So we get a lot of exposure to it. So if you're new to PowerShell, well, guess what? Maybe 5-6 years from now, you're still going to be learning about this similar stuff that kind of keeps informing you, and you get to the point where you're Gilbert out here, and you know so many languages, they all inform each other. It's very, what's it like for you now to learn a new language now that you sort of had a pretty broad experience, a good amount of career has happened for you?
You start to kind of see, like, so you mentioned, like, if your background is computer science, this is like way more interesting. Like I'm a sociology major, community college dropout, right? Like I didn't learn any of that stuff in school. I just was very curious about this stuff. So like, you start to kind of identify, like, it's like, I know what that looks like, and that looks like this. They just call it different things. It was like, oh, what's a closure? Or it's like, what's a, what is, I'm forgetting all the names now. You kind of start to learn, like, the flow of control, conditional logic. And I wouldn't say it's easy, because it definitely is, it definitely takes work to try to understand it. But sometimes once you start to learn the lingo for your language, you can say, like, give me the for loop in this language, right? Like, or give me the I don't know, I can't think of anything right now.
How do I iterate through
a
list?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, what is a, oh my God, I just forgot all the Python. I had Python example, but I totally just blanked all of them. Yeah,
AST.
so generators, right? Like understanding how generators work and stuff like that. And then you start to understand where certain languages are very powerful and then where other languages have made different trade-offs for that stuff. So,
Oh, there's a lot to learn, but we get paid for it. That's pretty reassuring right there. You get paid for it. It's to write fun code, feel like an epic elite hacksaw. Doesn't get much better than that, man. What's give us a gift though. We're ready for a recommendation. What do you got for us? I'm going to ask you 3 modules at the end, so maybe save those. But you got a gift for us? The people out there, they want something. They're a little greedy, but it's okay.
Yeah, I think if it's not the modules, I think one thing I was mentioning that I really has been extremely helpful in like troubleshooting some of the script analyzer stuff that I've been doing is the new versions of the PowerShell extension have the ability to turn on like tracing and like diagnostic logs. So like you can get like very high level of like understanding of like what is like when you hit save, what is it doing under the hood? Like, oh, it's calling script analyzer and it read this, it's reading this script analyzer rule and when it was looking at the code, it saw this error or something like that is insanely helpful. If you go to your settings and you look at the PowerShell, some of the PowerShell settings, usually you want to flip that stuff only when you want to like submit a bug. But like if you're doing some real gnarly stuff, that is like very helpful. I think Justin Grody did a lot of that stuff recently, and Andy and folks have been doing a lot of really awesome stuff with the PowerShell extension. So that's been really helpful.
So the tip is to enable the crazy debugging.
If you are troubleshooting some funky issues in VS Code, it is very helpful. Because when it's a black box and you're like, I do a thing and I expect this to happen, but I don't know why isn't it working? I will say troubleshooting script analyzer rules in VS Code, like before this, was just like, I think this is how it should work. Well, it isn't. Why? Right? Like it's, you're like so many layers above and removed from what it's doing that it's like it can be really hard. So if you do decide to write your own rules and you're like, I'm trying to understand why this isn't working, you could flip that stuff on. That's very helpful.
Gilbert, I'm a guy. I'm just an IT person, right? I love PowerShell. And I'm following Gilbert already on social media. Who else should I be following? Who is your kind of most interesting person on social media or on socials in general? Maybe sharing tidbits about security or PowerShell or whatever it has. What's a good recommendation you got for the people out there?
Oh man, I've been doing a lot of posting on Blue Sky. The Blue Sky's community's really been really good for like PowerShell stuff. Yeah, I would highly recommend following the PowerShell starter pack. I've almost I don't know if you remember, I used to have the feed in Twitter for all the PowerShell podcast guests, and I've been tempted to bring that back in Blue Sky, but I haven't gotten around to it. It's just too many projects going on.
I mean, PS Blue Sky, I think, is the module you could use. It might help you. Well, yeah, I've enjoyed Blue Sky as well. So check out the PowerShell. I don't even know what the starter pack is great, but also just like the PowerShell topic is where like all I see on Blue Sky is PowerShell stuff. That is
pretty much.
For very, very few exceptions. Maybe it's someone who like mentions PowerShell in passing when they're talking about something else, but
funny enough, I think the one post I got that got a lot of traction was mostly I was noticing that a lot of folks who were hating on PowerShell mostly didn't understand what you could do in PowerShell, and so it was like assume that this is like it's just a lack of knowledge versus malice. Like there's some people who don't like the language because of the syntax and because they prefer terse syntax, right? But sometimes you'll read these things as like PowerShell can't do this, like, and then you're like, wait a second, yes it can. Like, it's, you know, you don't realize that it can, and like this is maybe potentially like an opportunity to like preach the word of PowerShell, right? Like, but I try not to be like too annoying with that stuff. But like, if there's an obvious answer, I'll be like, hey, you should try this. You know,
It has been interesting to see though. Like I see a lot of people who are like, 15 years ago, Microsoft did X, Y, and Z. And that's sort of like where some of the impression comes from. Is like maybe they've just always thought of Microsoft in their languages, or maybe PowerShell early on, they had some bad experiences, whatever. That's sort of been the constant. And I've been kind of relieved to see people who are open-minded a little bit. When you give them like kind of a kind, well-informed answer, they're open to not having PowerShell be bad.
Yeah. I think the other thing I call that was like, the other thing was there are people who hate on it and then are like, oh, oh, I see what you're saying. Like, okay, I this is interesting. And then there are going to be people who are like, Microsoft with $, MS with $. It's like, okay, you've this is your hill that you want to die on, and you've decided that nothing's going to change your mind. I'm not going to change your mind. That's okay. Like, I don't have to. You can't please everybody. But like for folks who are who want help and are willing to hear it, like there are plenty of us. I've seen this on Blue Sky. There are plenty of us who are happy to help people, right? So yeah.
Yep, I'm always telling people, just get involved, just start asking questions, just get out there. You'll see it's not quite as scary as it might seem in your mind. At least it seemed in my mind.
It's also ask the questions that you feel like are stupid questions, because they're probably not stupid. I mean, what you might take for granted might be something that somebody's not thought about, right? And like because there's a million ways to do things, I'm always curious. It's like, how are other people doing this, right? Like maybe I have certain restrictions that don't let me do things the way that they are, but like maybe I can learn something. Like, so like I recently asked folks about like, how are you guys releasing modules, right? Like I know how I've done it, and I've been doing it this way for a few years, but like, have I missed something? And apparently there's a few things that I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. Like, like it's okay. Like in theory, I should know this, right? But like, it's okay to revisit your assumptions. So, and like, and like see maybe something else is out there that's cool, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's important to remember that nobody started out knowing everything. It's okay to embrace where you are in the journey, whether that's super far, whether that's early on. Maybe you're advanced in some things, new at other things. Me, I know a couple things about some stuff, but I didn't know anything about ASTs. I did know a thing or two because we've talked about it before on the podcast. But in general, no real working knowledge with ASTs, and that's okay. Thank you for teaching me today, Gilbert, because there's some people who are like Matthias. Probably everything you've said he would have known 100 times over. So to him, it wouldn't have been that valuable. But someone like me, super valuable. You got to get in where you fit in.
Yeah, there's I'm sure people might see some of the demo and be like, why did you do it that way? There's definitely better ways to do things. But like, I'm open to that, right? Like I want to know, am I doing, is there a better way? Like I want to know how to do it better, right? And so I think, I definitely, even the things I know, I may not know, the best, but like, being open to learning and hearing feedback, right? And trying to become better at, is always a positive thing, especially in your career, right? Like, stay humble, right? Like, learn from anybody who's willing to teach. Just listen to the PowerShell podcast, success guaranteed.
Yes, man. And it's very reassuring to me to know that you listen. So I always appreciate
every single Monday, without fail.
And you know what? Shout out to everyone else who listens every Monday. I know there's a good group of us who are sort of all growing and learning together and sort of bought in. And it's one of the greatest joys of my year, I would say, honestly, is just hearing from more of the people who are either super early on and they're taking their first steps and seeing those success stories, or people who are more advanced who are also getting value out of it. That really has made such a difference to me. So shout out to everybody who said hi, who said thank you, come up in a conference or online or whatever. It is awesome. And it's cool to know that we're not alone here. I'm not the only one here who's kind of learning and passionate about this. In fact, every single week I talk with other people who are passionate about this, who are telling you why these are important skills to learn. Maybe they're not the easiest at times, but listen, you have what it takes. I talk to a lot of people who, intelligent wise, they're not going to be the top 1% in the room. They're still able to accomplish amazing things that blow my mind, which is very rare. I think that's true for everything, though. If you just keep progressing for long enough in most fields, you'll be able to do impressive stuff if you kind of have that growth mentality.
I forget what it's called, but it's it's you kind of get to a point where it's you realize that knowledge is not one circle that you try to fill up into. It's actually it's just you have your own circle and other circles will overlap with it, but you'll never know all the same exact things that somebody else will. Even if you were, at the same company and working together for a long time, there will be spaces for you to learn. And so being open to learning is always, is helpful.
It's imperative. And now that kind of segues into a question I have for you. And maybe this is the answer, maybe it's not. But when and this doesn't have to be a current job or a recent job, just in general with career, you're going to a job, what is an exciting thing for you to see from a coworker who claims to know PowerShell? What is something that's reassuring to you? Maybe a green flag, call it.
A green flag for PowerShell. I think I don't know if this is a funky answer. I have always said that people who know what their tool is good at and not good at are the people who are going to probably be the most successful, right? When you are given a hammer, everything is a nail. It's when you start to realize that everything can't be a nail. I love PowerShell, right? That's my jam. If I can use PowerShell, that's what I'm going to go to. But there are situations that maybe that's not the right answer. And knowing that is for sure. Maybe you don't build this one in PowerShell. And you understanding maybe why is also helpful. Knowing where it's weak and being open to the fact that it can't do everything. Everything at the top performance, right? You're not going to have a PowerShell BGP router. It's not going to, it's probably not the right call, but maybe if you're feeling crazy, but.
And I feel like there's some overlap where if you have the mindset of PowerShell is going to be the solution for every single problem ever, which I don't share that opinion, and I don't think I profess that on the podcast. But let's say you did have that opinion. Well, the way you kind of argue for yourself is going to come across in not so good way, I would imagine. Whenever you're trying to get buy-in, it's oh no, they're just totally sold on PowerShell again. It's better to be honest about things. Sometimes maybe it doesn't even make sense to write code at all. It makes sense to use some other solution to do whatever you're trying to do. But yeah, you don't want to be that cringy person who and no offense, we've all been there, where you find a solution that works for you, and you tell everybody in your whole life that it's exactly what they need to be doing. Sometimes people need to see it for themselves. Sometimes your perspective on things isn't the universal truth that we're looking for. But yeah, it's good to keep those things in mind and to be open-minded. Because I think that there's an overlap with self-awareness and a good working environment and happy team cultures and all that. I think the more challenging cultures or advanced cultures. Oh man, it's honestly getting so complex because whenever I think of culture, I think of the people thing. And then I also think of the standards they hold themselves to technically and security wise, because those are also sort of.
This is maybe more on the emotional side, but trust is one thing I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but it is if you trust your teammates or a coworker, maybe you have a coworker who hates PowerShell, but you trust them because you trust that they have the right goals in mind, right? That you guys are trying to solve problems, and they don't like using PowerShell, but they're willing to concede that they're willing to say what, I think that's fine, or what, I think this should be done a little different, and here's my suggestion. But if you trust that person, you can disagree, right? You can safely disagree, say I don't think I would solve that. And those people become very helpful when you're trying to understand broader, or when you're trying to design broader things, right? They're the ones who are going to give you the feedback that might help you actually make your solution better, because you trust them, even though you don't necessarily always agree with them.
Yep, that's huge. Because I've been on the side where it's like people say yes. Like early on, whenever I got PowerShell going, I was doing some good stuff. People would pretty much just say yes to me because I knew how to write PowerShell, and they didn't, and they just assumed that there was a certain other level of knowledge that informed that every single thing I said would be correct. Not true. And having that ability to, like, the safety in the relationship and the culture in general, to have that kind of honesty be forefront and not just have everyone say, oh, that looks great. And just like, oh crap, I'm not, it'll be okay. Hopefully it doesn't break anything. I'd much rather and seek those coworkers who are going to be honest, like you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But
they'll also ask the right questions, right? It's like, I don't understand how that works. How does that work? Why would that work that way? And you can say, oh yeah, it's because PowerShell, the way that it, the process works is X, Y, and Z, or, et cetera, like whatever, maybe some fundamental things about PowerShell that's different from their preferred language. But again, it goes back to like trust, right? Like they trust that I will be honest with them, and I trust that they will be honest with me and give me feedback, even if it might not be the feedback I want to hear.
Yeah, and it kind of pairs with communication well. As well. I mean, these are kind of challenging skills, especially to develop in addition to technical skills. Like, it takes a serious concerted effort. And I think it can also be very hard to do in a vacuum. Like, if you don't have anyone else at work who's maybe more emotionally mature or things like that, like, it's going to be challenging to implement some of these. But we're here for you. I think that's where joining the community really helps out, because you'll be able to interact with, see how other people handle themselves who maybe work at places where the standard of communication is a little bit higher. So they're just at an advantage. They've been able to learn from that environment for longer. But what I did, at least, was I kind of piggybacked off a lot of that by meeting people in the community. Like you, like if you go get active in the community, you'll have chances to talk to Gilbert yourself, and you can learn a thing or two about how to share ideas, how to be wrong sometimes. Like, those kind of softer skills can be hard to fill in at a typical role.
For sure. I think, I had the same, probably did the same thing that everybody does in the early career, where you're like, I'm the smartest dude in the room. Nobody can tell me I'm wrong. And, they don't know what they're talking about, versus being open and being like, why, being curious, like, why do you think that that's not right? That it's like, you get much farther that way when you ask questions. Right. So.
Yep. And I think, for me, at least, I can see sometimes when people talk about customers and the way they talk, like, oh, they're so stupid. And when in reality, I mean, really, they're not too much different than us in any way. They're not thinking about IT problems all the day. Let's imagine this is like a help desk and like some kind of end user who can't figure out how AutoCAD works. Okay, whatever. They have other problems they're dealing with. Like, if you can be empathetic and not just jump to them being dumb, I have a lot more respect for you. And I think that you're more of a productive coworker potentially for other conversations that might need to be had. When you just kind of shut people down and don't have any empathy or understanding, I don't think that's the best approach.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have customers, you don't have a job, right? So it's, it's why there's entire, books and stuff on this, is like, you want to keep your customers, you want to have good interactions, right? Like, if they're coming in heated, why are they coming in heated? Like, is there something you could have done to help that? Right? Like, are you being empathetic? Right? Going back to one of your questions, you had asked me, what's a green flag? Customer service experience is a green flag. If you've been in the trenches and you've faced customers face to face, in my experience, the folks that I know that have done that, how they handle themselves is always very well, right? Like, what it's like to be in the situation of the person who has to face customers. And so you're not going to throw things over the fence, right? You want to make sure that you communicate with that person at whatever level and that customer, right? Because you know what it's like to be there. So that is definitely a green flag.
Dude, I love that. What were some of your jobs before IT?
I was a candy, actually kind of Christmas related. I used to stock candy at C's Candy in the Bay Area. So yeah, that was a fun job. I worked at CompUSA when that was still in business at one of their help desks. So that was a customer facing role. I worked at Fry's at like a all the positions that there existed. I used to take phone calls for dial-up ISPs. I don't know if you guys knew this, but Fry's Electronics used to have a dial-up service, so I used to take dial-up service calls. And it's really hard to help troubleshoot dial-up calls when you're on the phone. So that you build a lot of empathy for folks, right? It's like, all right, I got to walk you through this, and like, we're going to have to hang up at some point, but I have to set you up for success.
Nice. And you reminded me. So I don't know if you listened to this episode. A couple weeks ago, I talked about it was an interview with me. Kelly interviewed me. And
Yes.
I talked about paintball briefly, previous job. And I was a server too and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But the paintball job, right? I had a couple people reach out to me on Twitter and Discord asking about it. And you know what I'm doing next weekend?
Paintball.
Actually, I think right before this episode goes live, I will be paintballing. Your boy's
Serving.
back into it. I don't know what happened, but it's just nostalgia. I don't know about you, but I like collecting hobbies and
Totally.
I get bored of one and just eventually, oh, that looks shiny again. Let me hop onto that paint. It's been about 6 years since I played paintball last, but let's pick it up again. Why not?
Yeah, that was fishing and collecting records and playing with ESP32s and hooking up all sorts of weird stuff. Wood. I was into woodworking for a hot minute. They're all expensive hobbies too. So
Don't even cover the PowerShell projects that we all start and maybe
yeah, exactly.
are at different levels of completion.
Yep.
But man, I want to hear about a tool that can make our life easier. We're navigating text. We're moving around. We want to select multiple lines. I know some hotkeys. I know a thing or two. Is there a project out there that maybe you're using that could be a little helpful for us when it comes to navigating text?
I was showing VS Code, but I definitely have enjoyed using Vim. Before we started recording, I was showing Andrew I used the Vim mode in PS Readline because I found that really helpful to navigate longer pieces of code and to delete lines and quickly move through things. It's what makes Vim mode in most services really helpful. Is like those interactions are like super handy. So yeah, I mean, before I was a Windows admin, I was a Linux admin, so I had to do Vim. So I learned to love it.
Well, just in case people don't know, basically Vim is that thing you always see memed. It's like, how do I get out of here?
Yeah.
It's a thing people never can remember how to do. Yeah, that's Vim. But it is cool. It's one of those things, again, if you're going to be spending your life in a terminal editing code, learning those hotkeys and the kind of shortcuts to edit text can be super valuable.
Yeah.
But I would warn you, if you're super early on, make sure it's the right time and it's something you care about.
Yeah, so VI is stock on a bunch of boxes. Vim is available on a lot of Linux boxes. The big thing that I've seen is a lot of folks using what's called NeoVim, which is kind of a newer iteration on Vim, and it's got a very powerful plugin system. It's very easy to accidentally get like too much stuff. It's like if you were to install VS Code for the first time, and then somebody gives you a bunch of extensions to install, suddenly you're like, what the heck is all this stuff? But there's some great content out there on how to use NeoVim and some of the cool things it can do. So, but I honestly think learning how to use Vim motions pays off a lot.
Vim Notion?
Motions.
Okay.
Yeah. So like, jumping words, deleting lines, like, if I want to delete up to a certain character, right? Like instead of spamming the delete key, I can just, delete up to the first dash. And, I don't know of a faster way to do it than some of the Vim motions.
No. Maybe you'll give a talk on Vim in the future. Who knows? I think PS Readline has some Vim shortcut stuff, right?
Yeah, that's the oh my gosh, what do they call
Vim
it?
keybinds or Vim mode?
Yeah, Vim mode. So on my terminal, what I do is I switch into Vim mode when I want to edit some of those lines. I actually added Vim mode support for PowerShell core in Starship. That was one of those projects. I think that's maybe I mentioned it in a blog on the dev container process, because again, Starship was Rust, and they needed me to run some stuff that I hadn't used before, and I tossed it all in a dev container, and I was able to just submit a PR in a language I don't normally write in, right?
Hey, dude, you got chops. How does that feel now to be at sort of the point in your career where it's not the hugest lift in the world to do some of these pretty impressive things? You feeling good? You're on the king of the castle, or you still feel like you're in the grind?
No, it's cool. It's fun, right? Like it's cool to look at something, and again, this is why I love open source. I literally was saying this earlier to coworkers. It's like, I love open source. It's if I wrote the code wrong, it's a PR, right? They don't have to approve it. They can tell me what's wrong with it. I have to do something different. Like, it's the cost of opening up a PR is pretty low, and specifically why I like dev containers is like, I didn't want to go and install a bunch of stuff on my local machine, but I have Docker, so like spin up a local container, throw a bunch of things in there, right? If they give you kind of some commands to run to set it up, so cool. I have a box that's kind of ready for that, and I'm off, right? Like, then I just have to write the code, and this is how I think the code works. So, see if it works, and then, we can do that.
Well, I want some more presents from you. But before that, I want to give a shout out to a very special someone. Not that special, but just like a little bit special. Like, it was great to meet them. Kind of special. And that's Trent Blackburn, your coworker, my friend. Met him at PowerShell Saturday. And you know what? I was lucky enough to get a private DJ set, me and my friend Ryan Park, private DJ set in a parking garage. Trent's a pretty sick DJ, dude. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. It was one of the things I learned about him pretty soon after I joined. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was rocking out to some ABBA, so that was a good conference memory right there. Good night. But I'm ready for some gifts, man. Give us 3 modules that will bring us joy and merriment in the new year and during this holiday season, as I'm dressed up like a freaking elf. But let's just keep going.
Yeah, I think the first one that came to mind was Profiler. So that one is been really, really helpful recently. Looking at some code, trying to understand, like, is this more performant? I think it is, right? Like, not having to make that assumption, like actually being able to run that. The fact that it tracks, you can run multiple iterations and it'll tell you the differences between, that's like super helpful. The other one that I recently used was the Secret Management 1Password extension. I believe that was by Chris Hunt. So I love using Secret Management. I use that in my scripts where I just don't want to have to remember to go get the credential. I have get secret. And now with some recent changes to support the newer version, when I get a secret, it gives me a little pop-up that says, do you want to allow PowerShell to go grab the secret out of the command line? And then I hit yes, and then it uses Windows Hello, like some fingerprint authentication, and then it gets the secret, right? Like, that's super, super cool. Like, I don't have to go open up a password manager, copy and paste passwords. Like, it makes that super handy. That one's been pretty cool. And then I don't know if I think the thing I thought you were alluding to potentially earlier was Spectre Console, PowerShell Spectre Console. So I was trying to look at a way to look at all my work items. I wanted to also look at, like, I track how long I work on certain branches, and I wanted to render that in my terminal. And it makes it very easy to kind of write almost TUI-like apps, right, with just some PowerShell. So that's been super cool to do.
Fellow TUI lover, right? You love those?
Yes, sir.
Hard to go wrong. They're always fun.
Yep. It's if I can stay in the prompt, that's nice.
Well, Gilbert, you've bestowed upon us just magnificent gifts. So much amazing learning can be done this holiday season. And you know what? Next year, it's time to set some goals. Have you written a blog yet? Okay, you have. Maybe those people out there haven't. Have you attended a PowerShell user group session? I know you have. What about you out there? If you haven't, next year is a really good time to get started on this whole thing. Mm-hmm. You keep hearing us talk about, we should get out there and share and connect and join the community. We say it a lot, Gilbert. You probably heard me say it too many times. But listen, sometimes we got to really act on that. The the time is now for some of you. Take that action, reach out, get connected, join some PowerShell user groups, comment on some socials, whatever you got.
Yeah, we're all friendly. First PowerShell Summit I ever went to, I was like, these are my people. Like, everyone was so nice and welcoming, and it's a good community. It was, I knew right away it was the nicest community I've ever joined as far as like programming language. And it was like, yeah, everyone is cool.
Completely agree. And if you're super shy, you're like, oh, you know what? That sounds good, but I'm super shy. That's all right. You can hit me up privately. I'm happy to connect you with some people who are maybe into the same stuff as you, or maybe just chat back and forth a little bit, hear about what you use PowerShell for, sort of what you're working on, what you're passionate about. But you got to do something, you know.
Yep.
Eventually you will make the choice to do it, but the sooner it is, the better it is. You know, a lot of the people I talk to, I ask them, like, what would you have done sooner? And they said, get involved.
Yeah.
This is your call to action.
For sure.
All right, Gilbert. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. It's been an amazing year. I think there's still one before technically the next year starts. I don't really know. I should look at a calendar once in a while. But listen, this is the holiday episode, so we're just going to keep it joyful and merry. You know what, Gilbert? People out there, they're like, wow, this dude's humble. This Gilbert guy, he's so smart. He works at all these places that make him sound like he knows what he's talking about, and he knows what he's talking about. I mean, he's the whole package. Where can we find this guy on social media? I know you mentioned Blue Sky, but where are you, man? And obviously links in the show notes, but.
Yeah, so I made what's called a little links. So I don't know if you've seen those sites where they show you all the, all your social media. If you go to links.gilbertsanchez.com, that's Sanchez with a Z, you will find all that stuff there.
Awesome. And I'll have links to that. A lot of socials there. And where are you most active, though? Give us a little short.
Blue Sky's been the thing that I've really been watching. I still like Mastodon. I think that has a kind of a different vibe. I still enjoy, but yeah, Blue Sky. If you'll usually recognize me with hey, it's Gilbert. That's usually my handle, and you'll see my funny avatar of my face, my better looking face.
A couple of years ago, hey,
yeah, when I was younger and had more hair.
I know how that goes. Well, awesome, man. It's always great chatting with you, and I really consider myself so lucky to be part of this community and have so many friends year over year here where we're all trying to help each other. We're all kind of growing together. We're all, have things outside of the PowerShell world where having a good, stable job is very helpful. And it's cool to sort of have this all in common and to be going through our careers and honestly our lives to a certain extent. It's kind of wild to think about, but to be able to go through that together and have such a supportive crew is something I am most grateful for going into this new year. But hey, if you're out there, drive safe, walk safe, do whatever you're doing safe. I wanted this episode to be a little bit longer so you could kind of vibe with us. Maybe you're off work this week and you're mowing your lawn or getting some time away from the family, kind of resetting your brain, hanging out with us here. We appreciate you either way. And if you enjoyed something, you want to share that cheer with others, hey, hit us up with a like, comment, subscribe. You too, Gilbert. And, tell your friends about us. Leave us a review, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast choice. Gilbert, we're worldwide. We're like on every podcast platform. Just a heads up. PowerShell deserves it, man. Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gilbert.
Yeah.
One final message. What do you got to say to the people?
Join the community. Take that first step. We all have something to learn. Share your knowledge with us. So
share it. And I'll tell you what, just because I know something more than someone else, I don't think I'm smarter than them. And I think that applies to everybody in the community. We're all very open. I'm excited to learn from people just as much as I am to teach them. But awesome, everybody. Take care. Happy holidays. Stay safe. And keep PowerShelling.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.